Greetings Warhammer enthusiast. Before you stands a voice assistant of the podcast, dedicated to spreading the greater good. If you find this information useful, please do not hesitate to leave a like and subscribe. Together, we shall explore the depths of the Warhammer universe and share in its wonders. In our previous videos, we ventured into the fascinating world of the Orkoids, exploring their intricate society and the concept of their Waaagh. We also began to unravel the tale of Ghazghkull, the formidable prophet of Gork and Mork. As the relentless invasion of Armageddon rolled onward, the infamous Ghazghkull was tormented by increasingly frequent visions. The once simple images that had haunted his mind now transformed into a grand cosmic spectacle. Thunderous roars of discontent from Gork and Mork echoed in his consciousness, their displeasure manifested in blinding headaches and brilliant crackling green lights that seemed to pulse with his heartbeat. Driven by this unseen burden, Ghazghkull withdrew from the front lines, entrusting his brutish generals with the continuation of the war. He retreated to the solitary confines of his gargantuan command ship, the ominous Kill Wrecker. There, amidst the industrial groaning of the ship and the distant hum of space, he brooded. In an attempt to interpret his disturbing visions, he gathered around him a throng of warpheads, the most enigmatic and deranged Ork mystics. Their eyes, gleaming with the lunacy of the warp, offered little comfort. It was in this unsettling company that Ghazghkull, alone, came to a profound realization. Among the whole of the greenskin race, he was unique. Where others found contentment in the carnage and chaos of war, Ghazghkull yearned for something more. The simple, bloody joy of a good fight like Armageddon was no longer enough to quench his thirst for conquest. Sudden manic energy ignited within him, a spark that propelled him into action. He commanded the Kill Wrecker to break orbit, much to the confusion of his crew. He hastily assembled a ragtag flotilla from the nearby Ork warships, an armada as unruly as its leader. With reckless abandon, he steered them towards the edge of the system, driven by a sense of purpose he did not yet understand. All he knew was that his destiny lay beyond Armageddon. His departure did not go unnoticed. Deep space orchestrations tracked the movement of the Kill Wrecker as it sped away from the Armageddon system. The High Command was swiftly informed. Commissar Yarrick and High Marshal Helbrecht of the Black Templars, esteemed heroes of the Imperium, elected to follow the rogue warlord into the void. They departed Armageddon, leading every available warship in pursuit of Ghazghkull. The Imperium had paid dearly for letting Ghazghkull escape once before, and Yarrick vowed to not repeat that mistake. Despite the lead Ghazghkull had won in his hasty departure, the relentless chase of his pursuers, led by the unforgiving efficiency of the Imperial Navy, was relentless. Weeks after leaving Armageddon, they caught up with the Ork fleet in the dread-ridden space of the Haunted Gulf. Realizing they were cornered, the Ork ships made a desperate last charge, rocketing straight into the lethal embrace of the Imperial Navy's guns. The silent void erupted into a symphony of destruction, lance beams slicing through the darkness while blazing broadsides painted an apocalyptic tableau. The Ork fleet fought with savage determination, crippling several Imperial cruisers, but they were gravely outmatched. Their ships were torn apart in the roaring maw of space, obliterated under the thunderous onslaught. On the brink of a decisive victory, Yarrick and Helbrecht readied their forces to board the Kill Wrecker, the lair of the beast himself, Ghazghkull. Their intention was clear, to ensure the demise of the great warlord once and for all. Yet, in a moment that would be forever etched in their memories, the ship was consumed by a blaze of green energy and vanished without a trace. In the wake of this eerie spectacle, a rapidly expanding spatial anomaly materialized, forcing Ghazghkull's pursuers into a hasty retreat. This anomaly would later swell into a formidable warp storm and ultimately contribute to the formation of the Great Rift, a nightmare in the fabric of space-time. In the heat of the battle, inside the turbulent confines of Kill Wrecker's bridge, Ghazghkull was in the throes of a vision so intense that he was enshrouded in arcing green lightning. The warlord bellowed commands with unmatched fury, and his warphead entourage fell into convulsions, overwhelmed by the surge of raw psychic energy. As the green energy licked around Ghazghkull and struck the Ork psychers, they were consumed by green flames. Their eyes burst in their sockets and their skin crackled and seared. However, from their agape mouths gushed ectoplasmic power, and the warpheads spoke as one. Their voice was the mighty roar of Gork and Mork that Ghazghkull had heard in his visions. Every orc within earshot was driven to their knees in awe, listening as their gods charged Ghazghkull with a monumental task. He was to gather a Waaagh like no other, a war cry of Gork and Mork themselves. The prophecy called for Ghazghkull to unite every greenskin under his rule and launch a galaxy-wide crusade of unparalleled violence and destruction. Ghazghkull was to assemble the Great Waaagh, and through this, summon Gork and Mork themselves to lead the boys in an eternal, glorious war. With their message delivered, the warp heads exploded, showering the bridge in a grotesque rain of viscera. A tidal wave of green power surged outward, overloading every system on the kill wrecker and sending a crippling shockwave towards his pursuers. In the following instant, the kill wrecker was thrust into warp space, re-emerging somewhere and somewhen entirely different, as Ghazghkull embarked on his divine mission. The twilight of the 41st millennium found the vast Imperium beleaguered by the wrath of the Leviathan, the third and most formidable Tyranid hive fleet to descend upon mankind. Like a ravenous storm, the hive fleet swept through the southern plains of the galaxy, leaving desolation in its wake. Amidst this havoc, Inquisitor Cryptman desperately sought a solution to quell the Tyranid menace. It was in the rugged wilds of the Orc Empire of Octarius that he found an unconventional answer, a stratagem that could turn mankind's ancient adversaries against the rampaging Tyranids. If successful, Cryptman's scheme could obliterate two formidable foes in one fell swoop. To set his audacious plan in motion, Cryptman led an elite cadre of Deathwatch squads, equipped for the grim task at hand, into the ominous caverns of Carpathia. Their mission, to ensnare a brood of genestealers alive within a stasis field. Despite the heavy toll in lives, the mission was successful. This captured brood was then planted aboard Perdition's Flame, a foreboding space hulk that emerged from the tumultuous warp, right in the path of the Leviathan. The genestealers stirred from their forced slumber as Cryptman annihilated the moon of Geist, a drastic measure to alter the Hulk's course and steer it towards the Octarius Empire. As the space Hulk trespassed into the Orc domain, it drew the attention of Orc looters, eager to scavenge the colossal Hulk for valuable spoils. However, they were ambushed by the genestealers, their bodies used as incubators for the xenomorphic parasites, leading to a widespread infestation that consumed the entire Octarius sector. The initial skirmishes against the infiltrating genestealers saw the intervention of war bosses from the Blood Axes clan. They enlisted boss Zagstruck and his renowned Vulture squad to intercept and annihilate the infestation. Despite their triumph, the genestealers had already sent a potent psychic beacon, attracting a tendril of the Leviathan. Responding to this beacon, the Hive fleet changed course and bore down upon the Octarius Empire. Rising to meet this new threat was the overfiend of Octarius, Blacktooth, who launched a daring counter-invasion against the oncoming Hive fleet. Yet, despite the tenacious resilience of the Orks, the relentless Tyranids swiftly infested a dozen worlds within the Octarius Empire in a matter of weeks, turning the region into a brutal theater of war, a testament to Inquisitor Cryptman's gambit. On the former bastion of the Imperium, the world known as Orkoid, the Orks bore witness to an unprecedented spectacle, as the skies above them darkened, obscured by a thick rain of millions of mycetic spores. The Greenskins were initially baffled by the ominous sight, yet their primal instincts of warfare quickly took hold. An alarm roared through their ranks, and in a frenzied hustle, the Orks rushed to their scattered arsenals, hurriedly manning their hastily built fortifications. Yet, even the bristling Orc defenses could barely withstand the onslaught of the Tyranid swarm. As the mycetic spores burst open upon descent, they unleashed hordes of gaunts that crashed into the Orc barriers like a living tidal wave. Undeterred, the Orcs countercharged with their characteristic ferocity, plunging headfirst into the oncoming Xenos tide. In the blink of an eye, thousands fell on both sides, their lifeless bodies littering the battlefield. It was a war raging on every conceivable scale. Amidst the boots of the larger combatants, Squigs and Rippers were locked in a savage dance of death, ripping and tearing into each other with tooth and claw. Meanwhile, the bulk of the struggle was held between the foot soldiers, Gaunts and Orc boys, locked in brutal combat, hacking and slashing with wanton abandon. Rising above them, the larger combatants took the field. Orc warbosses and nobs went toe-to-toe with the formidable Tyranid warriors and carnifexes in brutal melees. Amidst the chaos, The ground shook as colossal entities joined the conflict. Mighty squigoths roared challenges to the gargantuan Tyranid bio-titans, their clashes sending shockwaves across the battlefield. Yet the war was not confined to the realms visible to the naked eye. Even at a microscopic level, the battle raged on, as the voracious Tyranid phage cells contended with the invasive Orkoid spores for dominance. The grim theater of Orok was in the throes of total war. Slowly, the realization dawned upon the Orks: they were encircled, vastly outnumbered by the relentless Tyranid horde. As the shadows of night fell upon Orok, every Ork had met their end, their lifeless bodies consumed to nourish the ever-growing Tyranid swarm. Shortly after the fall of Orok, the mighty Leviathan set its sights upon Gorala, the formidable bastion of the notorious pirate warboss Scarfang and his feared Scar fleet. As the Tyranid Leviathan advanced upon the planet, it was met by a fierce resistance of Ork vessels amassing from a dozen light-years around, supplemented by a dense array of minefields concealed within Gorala's asteroid belt. These hidden explosives wreaked havoc on the advancing bioships, tearing them apart in a series of cataclysmic detonations. In the ensuing chaos, Ork gunships swooped in, raining fire upon the surviving Tyranid vessels. Under the relentless barrage of Scarfang's guns, the Tyranid fleet was all but decimated. Yet amidst this havoc, a single bioship managed to penetrate the Ork blockade, casting itself heedlessly at Gorala. As it plummeted towards the planet, it released thousands of mycetic spores onto the equatorial plains of Gorala. Watching from his distant command post, Scarfang quickly realized the space battle had ended, but the true conflict was only beginning on the planet's surface. Eager to face their foes, the Orks descended onto Gorala, ready for the ground war. On Gorala, the Tyranids found themselves vastly outnumbered by the Orks for the first time since their incursion into the Octarius sector. Faced with an inevitable defeat in a war of attrition, the Tyranids adopted a new strategy. They began stalking and ambushing isolated Ork patrols, thinning their numbers. However, the Orks soon began moving in larger groups, too vast for the fledgling Tyranid swarm to confront. Adapting to this new challenge, the Tyranids adopted a new strategy, focusing on maximum carnage and engaging the Orks in open combat. Whenever the tide seemed to turn against them, the Tyranids would retreat in unison, seeking shelter in the intricate network of caves beneath Gorala's surface until nightfall. When darkness fell, the Tyranid synapse creatures would reassemble the scattered swarms, returning them to the battlefield to feast on the fallen. The corpses of friend and foe alike were devoured and transported to digestion pools hidden within the rocky mesas of the planet. Bit by bit, the Tyranids gathered bioresources, bolstering their numbers. With their growing strength, they started to confront larger Ork forces, escalating the violence and chaos on Gorala. Amidst the increasing violence, Scarfang was drawn into the conflict. His guttural war cries echoed across the battlefield, stirring the Ork forces into a battle frenzy that slowly pushed the Tyranids back. In response, the Tyranids birthed new lictors, with the sole purpose of assassinating Scarfang. But their plans were thwarted time and again by vigilant squighounds. In a final, desperate move, the Tyranids lured Scarfang into a cunningly designed trap. Launching waves of hormagaunts at the Ork lines, they would then retreat, igniting Scarfang's fury. Enraged by the repeated feints, Scarfang ordered his forces to pursue the retreating Tyranids. The Ork armada, composed of battle wagons and war trucks, roared in pursuit of the Tyranids, only to fall into the meticulously laid Tyranid ambush. Broods of venomthropes surrounded the Ork forces, engulfing them in a thick, toxic fog. Blinded and choking, the Ork convoy descended into chaos, crashing into rocky outcrops and each other. Amidst the disarray, Scarfang found himself in the midst of the venomthropes. Enraged, he vented his fury on the creatures surrounding him. But when the fog receded, he found himself surrounded by lictors. His boys had been picked off one by one, until he stood alone amidst the enemy. He managed to take 2 steps towards his foes before a dozen claws tore him apart. The death of their leader sent shockwaves through the Ork ranks on Gorala. Without Scarfang's command, they devolved into infighting and squabbling, making them easy prey for the Tyranids. One by one, the isolated tribes were hunted down and eradicated. Within a matter of weeks, all Orks on Gorala had been silenced. The once mighty stronghold of the Scar fleet was reduced to a barren husk. The Tyranids transformed the bioresources of the fallen Orks into new bioships, allowing the infestation to spread rapidly to the surrounding Ork worlds. At the heart of the Octarius sector stood the planet of Octarius itself, ruled by the mighty Overfiend. News of Oryx's fall reached the Overfiend, compelling him to marshal his tribes and prepare for the inevitable attack. When the initial wave of mycetic spores descended upon the planet, the waiting Ork hordes let loose a cheer, thrilled by the promise of an impending grand battle. The first engagements took place in the skies above, the air thick with flak and bullet casings as Ork quad guns and flakadaka guns spewed forth a relentless storm of fire. So intense was the aerial exchange that the rain falling upon Octarius was mingled with the flesh of the slain Tyranids. As the battle raged on, from the western horizon came a foreboding sight. What initially appeared as storm clouds drew nearer, revealing themselves to be swarms of advancing gargoyles. In response, Ork defcopters, fighter bombers, and stormboys took to the sky, racing to intercept the oncoming Tyranid swarm. A rain of fallen Orks, burning wreckage, and Tyranid ichor soon blanketed the landscape, testament to the violent clashes overhead. On the ground, Ork boys clambered up the slopes, choppa raised high, eager to leap into the fray. Amidst their zeal, the very earth beneath them erupted as genestealer broods burst forth from subterranean tunnels. The Orks quickly reacted, pushing the invaders back into the crevasses from which they emerged and plunging in after them. In the mountainsides, lictors lurked, methodically silencing the Ork gun emplacements one by one. With the major Ork artillery silenced, the barrage of mycetic spores intensified, and more Tyranids descended upon the mountain passes, met by an equally zealous Ork resistance. The scope of the bloodshed Octarius was witnessing was unparalleled, and the war rapidly spread throughout the Octarius sector. The conflict in the Octarius sector only escalated further. War hosts of the elusive Eldar entered the fray, fighting against both the Imperial and Ork forces. Other Imperial worlds found themselves caught in the crossfire as the Siamhan Eldar joined the war, prompting the Raven Guard, White Scars, and Salamander's chapters to unite in defense of the besieged planets. Meanwhile, reports indicated the presence of the Tyranid Swarmlord, having joined the assault on the Orks of Octarius. Regardless of the victor, one thing was certain: the winner of this war would emerge far stronger than before. Orks from light years around were drawn to the conflict on Octarius, growing bigger and stronger amidst the constant battle. And each fallen Ork provided more biomass to the expanding Tyranid swarm, which continuously learned and adapted new ways to defeat their foes. The plan of Inquisitor Cryptman to lure Leviathan to the Octarius Empire had indeed succeeded, but rather than tricking both sides into annihilating each other, his scheme had inadvertently sparked a chain of events that was only strengthening the enemies of the Imperium. In the midst of sprawling territory, under the control of Ork warlord Urgok Da Slayer, the gargantuan ship Kill Wrecker emerged from the warp, its arrival causing the very fabric of space-time to tremble. Its infamous master, Ghazghkull, was revitalized, his red eyes blazing with a rekindled purpose as the monstrous ship set a direct course for Urgok's mighty space fortress. Knowing that the element of surprise was his only advantage in this audacious assault, Ghazghkull activated his ship's teleporter. A roar of displaced air and a blinding burst of light heralded the arrival of Ghazghkull and his cohort of hardened knobs directly into the throne room of the unsuspecting Urgok. The sudden onslaught caused consternation and panic, and the warlord could only watch in horror as Ghazghkull tore through his bodyguards with merciless ferocity. Their mangled bodies littered the floor, creating a grim carpet over which Ghazghkull advanced, his weapon still smoking. He loomed over his cowed rival, extending a not-so-peaceful invitation to join the Great Waaagh. Most of Urgok's boys, sensing the change of leadership, willingly joined the Waaagh, while those less quick to adapt were swiftly and brutally coerced into submission. Word of Ghazghkull's new Waaagh spread far and wide in a matter of weeks, the tales of the colossal warboss reaching the ears of Orks hundreds of light years away. This sparked an unprecedented migration of Orks, amassing forces on a scale never seen before. With a fresh Waaagh at his disposal and Urgok reduced to a mere underling, Ghazghkull turned his attentions towards the Octarius Empire in the galactic southeast. He understood that a galaxy-wide war would require an even greater Ork force for the Great Waaagh of Gork and Mork. Moreover, Ghazghkull had a personal score to settle. He had decided to show the Ork ruler of Octarius what a true overfiend looked like. Octarius had been a bastion of Ork power for countless millennia. The territory was no backwater sector. Every once in a while, a leader would rise, call a war, and lead a devastating invasion against a part of the galaxy. The previous warlord, Gorsnik Magash, had joined Ghazghkull in the Golgotha sector and was presently leading a massive Ork force on Armageddon. In Gorsnik's absence, a new leader had risen to claim the title of Overfiend of Octarius, the Death Skull warlord named Zog Steeltooth. But his rule had been unstable, the empire teetering in the midst of a monumental war against the Tyranids. Ghazghkull saw an enticing opportunity for a worthy fight and led his forces into battle against the relentless alien horde. Upon slaying a mighty Morlock, Ghazghkull assumed leadership of the Ork forces engaged in the Octarius sector, deeming this conflict to have even more potential than Armageddon. He later departed Octarius, now leading an intimidating armada of 5 million ships against the Imperium, leaving the galaxy bracing itself for an unprecedented onslaught. Drawn by the intoxicating aroma of warfare, a warband of world-eaters known as the Skull Hunt of Voda Bloodprice ventured into the conflict-laden Octarius system. The promise of bloodshed, of the Tyranids and Orks locked in a savage, escalating dance of destruction was a siren call they couldn't resist. And they were not left disappointed. In a span that felt barely longer than a fleeting heartbeat, over 8,000 skulls were claimed in the name of the blood god, Khorne, each one as colossal as a boulder. The climax of this blood frenzy was the ascension of Voda himself to demonhood, earned through the spectacular feat of felling a Hierophant Bio-Titan with the great axe wrested from the lifeless grasp of the fallen Ork war boss, Magza da Colossus. His ascension to demonhood invigorating him with unholy power, Bloodprice sought to command an even larger warband, drawing not only from the Skull Hunt, but also the ranks of the Bloodblessed, Bloody Dawn, Gorefists, and the Harvest. Their ranks were swelled further by hordes of devoted cultists, primal beastmen, relentless chaos knights, and the twisted, mechanized terror of the Dark Mechanicum. Bloodprice set his sights on the Ork world known ominously as Da Mor, a hellish landscape where countless hordes of Tyranids and Greenskins engaged in cataclysmic battle. To Bloodprice, the spectacle of ceaseless slaughter was nothing short of paradise, a grand blessing from Khorne himself. Leading his armada from his flagship, the menacingly named Gore-Drenched, he charged into the planet's orbit. Bloodprice showed no preference or mercy, his forces tore through both Greenskin and Tyranid ships alike, a relentless surge towards the planet, all in the pursuit of total, utter slaughter. In the wake of the Great Rift, the Imperium began to realize the horrifying reality. Kryptman's desperate gambit had merely served to strengthen both warring sides. There was a growing dread that the gruesome conflict would inevitably spill over into Imperial territory. It was Inquisitor Nashir Sahanson who proposed a desperate measure, the Cordon Impenetra. Drawing a sphere around the outer reaches of the contested space, he conceded every Imperial world within the zone as lost, urging every bordering subsector to bolster its defenses. Many worlds were absorbed into the Cordon Impenetra, and a concerted effort was launched by the Imperials to destabilize the ever-warring Xenos. But it was a futile attempt, a mere drop against the relentless tide. The expansion of the Xenos proved unstoppable, their blood-soaked dominion stretching outwards, ever closer to the trembling heart of the Imperium. In the Pancalis subsector, pandemonium reigned. World after world sent desperate pleas for aid as the onslaught of the Xenos became increasingly brutal. Ork warlords and Genestealer cults rose from the darkness, mercilessly invading and ravaging planet after planet, their insatiable hunger for conquest seemingly unending. And as if that wasn't enough, chaos itself had been unleashed in full fury, unveiling secret sects and tribes loyal to the dark gods and making a complete mockery of order and rule. Meanwhile, the Stugbrog da Facegrinder and Nabrot Stubfingers, the notorious Ork warlords, ignited a wave of devastation across the Semethis and Kernak systems. Their brute forces, driven by a wild, unquenchable thirst for domination, mercilessly trampled over the worlds of Tylam, Nazca, and Qsulst. As if to add to the burgeoning bedlam, the gargantuan Tyranids of Hive Fleet Leviathan descended upon the unsuspecting Anilani, Byanzir's Hollow, and Gydisk systems. Their insatiable hunger led them to ravage through the iron beech forests of Gydisk Tertius, the dense jungles of Gydisk Alpha, and the vast, steam-powered kingdom flotillas of Gydisk Betaries, rendering entire worlds lifeless in their wake. Yet, amidst the onslaught and the ensuing chaos, a beacon of hope arose. The valiant Imperial forces rushed to answer the desperate pleas for aid, steeling themselves against the dire circumstances that loomed over them. The Death Watch, alongside the distinguished chapters of the Space Marines, the Wolf Spear, Atlantean Spears, Obsidian Jaguars, and Dark Krakens, all stood in unity against the looming Xenos threat. The Wolf Spear, in a brilliant display of tactical prowess, buried a horde of Tyranids beneath a monumental avalanche. Yet, their victory was tinged with the harsh reality of war as the ensuing tsunami destroyed the precious Prometheum rigs stationed at the sea's bed. Simultaneously, the Dark Krakens embarked on a grueling campaign in the treacherous terrains of the Herdalo forest. Their objective was to drive the Tyranids from the forest, safeguarding the Ursenwolves that inhabited its icy stretches from being assimilated into the Xenos swarm. The Dark Krakens, undeterred by the brutal weather and hostile terrain, fought a bitter battle, their determination unwavering, and their spirits unbroken. Despite the courageous efforts of the Imperial forces, however, certain worlds slipped from their grasp. Kernak III, a crucial planet under the Mechanicum's jurisdiction, fell to the cunning Ork warlord, Stubfingers. He had managed to close in on the planet's orbital defenses, using captured Mechanicum cruisers and frigates to avoid suspicion. By the time the defenders realized the ruse, it was too late, and the orbitals fell amidst a torrent of fire. On Kernak V, the valiant defense led by Governor Abrahoma Bental met with a similar fate. Despite their strategic preparations and a seemingly endless arsenal of weapons, the planet fell to the Orks, their ranks swelled by the arrival of the belligerent Stugbrog da Face Grinder. The cataclysmic clashes of the Pancalis battlefront became so brutal, so devastating, that it was forever etched in the annals of Imperial history as the Pancalis Cauldron. The interstellar battlefields bore witness to a struggle for survival that echoed across star systems, their cries for help drowned out by the ferocity of the Xenos' onslaught. In the far reaches of the cosmos, amidst the unending waltz of celestial bodies, lay the formidable forge world of Sigma-Ulstari. A stronghold of both industrial might and strategic significance, it served as an essential astropath relay post, its importance recognized by none other than the vigilant Inquisitor Nashir Sahanson. This was the lone bastion in the cordon impenetra that refused to be abandoned. Under the stern command of Fabricator General Einrek Phlegustok, Sigma-Ulstari bristled with formidable forces, a grand fleet of defense monitors and thousands of macroclades of Skitarii standing watch. Yet, as mighty as it was, Sigma-Ulstari was not untouched by the galaxy's turmoil. Millions of refugees sought sanctuary within its towering spires, fleeing from the horrors of war, only to be thrust into the cold, unfeeling grip of the Mechanicum's slave labor. Those who escaped this grim fate were herded into camps on distant worlds, or left languishing in transport ships for unending months. As the refugee crisis swelled to unprecedented levels, the harbingers of another impending disaster were discovered, the ominous silhouettes of Tyranid bioships lurking in the dark. Their first onslaught was on the ocean world of Deuteria. Tyranids, armed with winged and oceanic organisms, plunged into the world, clashing against a storm of anti-aircraft fire, barrage balloons, and explosive minefields. Despite the initial chaos, the Xenos were eventually thwarted through a daring gambit. Imperial hunting flotillas played a dangerous game of attraction, drawing the Tyranids into a concentrated point, only to unleash flights of gunships bearing atomic depth charges. The destruction was immense, but the world was saved. When the Tyranid swarm reached Sigma-Ulstari, the world's vast toxic ocean served as a formidable barrier. Genestealers and lictors marked these toxic bodies with warning scents, diverting the Tyranid advance into strategic bottlenecks. These choke points became theaters of desperate struggle, as Skitarii, Imperial Guard, Knights, and the formidable Legio Ferocastrum fought tooth and nail against the advancing Tyranids. Battles blazed across the radioactive plains and the towering forge spires, as fleets of the Imperial Navy and Basilican Ustra clashed against swarms of bioships in the planet's orbit. Despite the catastrophic losses, the defenders of Sigma-Ulstari emerged victorious, but the challenge of purging millions of remaining Tyranids loomed large. Months later, a new enemy set its sights on the beleaguered system. Blood Axe's Orks under Zagrob da Butcher, having infiltrated the quarry world of Malaxum, waged brutal war against the planet's armed stone cartels and lumber syndicates. Employing stealth and cunning, the Orks captured numerous logging ships, converting them into devastating war machines. However, the defenders ultimately turned the Orks' strategies against them, luring Zagrob to a cliff laced with explosives. The detonation sent the Greenskins crashing below, their command structure shattered by their warboss's demise, allowing the Imperial forces to seize victory. Sigma-Ulstari, meanwhile, endured two fierce onslaughts by the Ork Gibkrung da Facecrumper and Ugal Ironboot. The defenders, drained from their previous conflict, faltered against the Ork advance. Their salvation came unexpectedly when the Orks collided with the remaining Tyranids on the Forge world, the mutual conflict buying precious time for the beleaguered defenders. Eventually, the Orks were repelled, but Fabricator General Phlegustok was all too aware that they could not endure another assault. When the next wave of invasion struck Sigma-Ulstari, it was larger and more relentless than ever before. The Tyranids, having adapted to the chemical-laden seas of the Forge world, took the Imperials by surprise. Only the quick actions of Baron Kaelin of House Galerius and the 813th Division of the Imperial Navy held the Tyranids at bay, but the relentless tide of Xenos continued to assail the Forge spires. Thousands of Skitarii and Electro-priests perished battling tunneling biotitans the size of Ordinatus war engines. Amid this desperate struggle, word arrived of a colossal Ork invasion fleet, led by Tuskargrob Worldkiller, warping into the system. The sudden appearance of the Greenskins took both the Tyranids and the Imperials by surprise, creating a three-way war that engulfed the entire system. As the Ork fleet clashed with Tyranid bioships in orbit, on the surface, Worldkiller's hordes descended upon the Forge world, igniting a brutal conflict that saw Forge spires crumble and entire sectors reduced to ruin. The warboss targeted the very heart of Sigma-Ulstari, the capital Forge spire of Alpha Primaros, commanded by Fabricator General Phlegustok himself. Despite the unyielding defense by the Imperials, the Orks advanced, their sheer numbers and relentless aggression proving too much for the exhausted defenders. Yet, Sigma-Ulstari's desperate plea for aid had been heard. In a dazzling spectacle of raw power and indomitable will, the Vengeance-class Grand Cruiser The Riches He Bestows, under the command of rogue trader Ava Falamor, arrived. Accompanied by the Retribution-class battleship Faithbringer and High Admiral Herika Agen, the fresh Imperial reinforcements brought renewed hope. The most imposing arrival, however, was the Eternal Crusader, the legendary flagship of the Black Templars, commanded by the indomitable High Marshal Helbrecht. The arrival of the reinforcements signaled a turning point in the war. As the Imperial forces dove headlong into the chaotic melee, millions of troops, tanks, knights, and titans flooded the battlefields of Sigma-Ulstari. Despite heavy losses to marauding Ork aircraft, the newly arrived Black Templars, Rift Praetors, and Axes of the Emperor turned the tide of the battle. The fighting reached its peak when Worldkiller sought to breach the final defenses of Alpha Primaros, utilizing colossal Orkiosauruses pulling explosive-rigged rams. It was here that High Marshal Helbrecht intervened. The ensuing battle was a spectacle of fury and courage, as Aeronautica Imperialis fighters dueled Ork aircraft for aerial supremacy, and Imperial Guard armored columns fought to halt the rampaging Ork vehicles. In a daring maneuver, Helbrecht and his Black Templars, along with Skitarii from the Sicarian class, boarded the Orkiosauruses, their arrival met with brutal resistance. The climax of this daring gambit was when Helbrecht came face to face with Worldkiller himself. Their duel was brutal, a dance of death as two warlords fought for the fate of a world. Worldkiller, in a display of raw power, managed to snap one of Helbrecht's arms and land a blow that cracked the High Marshal's skull. But as the warboss moved to strike the final blow, Helbrecht unleashed a point-blank shot from his Combomelter Duty's burden, wounding Worldkiller. With the warboss reeling in pain, Helbrecht seized the moment and drove his sword through Worldkiller's head. With the death of their leader, the momentum of the Orks faltered. Thus, against all odds, Sigma-Ulstari had endured, battered but not broken. The echoes of war rang out across the scarred landscape, a testament to the fierce determination and unyielding courage of its defenders. It had been a battle of monumental scale, where the forces of man and machine stood against the insurmountable tide of Xeno invaders. And in the face of utter annihilation, they had prevailed. The price had been heavy, but the forge world of Sigma-Ulstari still stood. In the heart of the Octarius system, an unprecedented drama was unfolding. The Swarm Lord of Hive Fleet Leviathan led the Tyranid invasion with such vast numbers of bioforms that it resembled a living, breathing nightmare. With this force, the alien entity cut off and laid siege to each planet held by the Orks. In a horrifying display of destructive power, the Swarm Lord decimated Ork in mere days, and plunged the orbital junker port of Ermak into a colossal void battle against ramshackle Ork vessels and massive Tyranid bioships. On the asteroid fortress of Gork's Bonds, big mechs fabricated thousands of eccentric weapons, turning entire Tyranid broods to dust with lightning barrages and reducing others to puddles of goo with gravitational distortions. Much of the fighting took place in narrow passages and choke points, and the Orks used their knowledge of the terrain to lay successful ambushes and infiltrate Tyranid bioships. Meanwhile, on Dakazot, the speed freaks of Ghazghkull da Spleen Ripper transformed the subterranean fights with the Tyranids into a brutal sport, crushing any Xenos that dared to surface beneath the treads of their vehicles. The cacophony of war echoed throughout the system as billions of Orks, and thousands of Squigosaurs under Gragnat's Stompkrumper eagerly engaged the Tyranids. Octaria, the capital of the Ork Empire, found itself under renewed attack. The Swarm Lord personally led a major push, shattering the precarious balance of power in a matter of days. He splintered off vast biofleets to attack other worlds, drawing away Ork reinforcements and supplies. The Swarm Lord perceived that Stompkrumper's momentum was waning on Badsquig. His Squigosaurs had perished, and the beast Snaggas were stymied by the adaptive Tyranids. In response to this dwindling power, the Swarm Lord unleashed a colossal bio-titan. This monstrous creature, a nightmare made flesh with fangs as tall as an Ork and claws that could shred a mega-fortress, fascinated the Orks. It was promptly named Da Blue One, and it became the target of every ambitious Greenskin, including Stompkrumper. Driven by the relentless need to assert dominance, Stompkrumper orchestrated trap after trap, sacrificing thousands of his troops in a vain effort to bring down Da Blue One. It was not to be. Stompkrumper and his horde found themselves surrounded by a Tyranid ambush and annihilated in a dry, dead lakebed. Back at Gork's Bonds, the Swarm Lord tightened his grip. He filled the asteroid fortress with tens of thousands of Genestealers, lying in wait for later instructions. A Tyranid attack on all fronts soon followed, with the Genestealers emerging to cut off Ork retreats and disable life support systems. This resulted in thousands of Orks being thrown into the cold void of space, and despite heavy casualties, the Tyranids systematically purged the Greenskins from the asteroid. At Ermak, the Swarm Lord deployed hordes of lamprey eel-like organisms, which burrowed into the shipyards and unleashed hundreds of Tyranids, leaving the Greenskins incapable of producing more ships. With the shipyards lost, the Tyranids seized orbit and swiftly digested the planet. The final target was Octaria. The Swarm Lord deployed thousands of bioships to block the planet, cutting it off from further reinforcements while vanguard organisms landed to wreak havoc behind Greenskin lines. Establishing air superiority was the next step, and the Tyranids soon prevailed in fierce aerial battles against the Orks. With the skies under control and the ground situation stabilized, the Swarm Lord cleared landing zones for mycetic spores to deliver billions of Tyranids. The Greenskin fortresses and megaweapons inflicted grievous casualties on the Tyranid hordes, but the alien forces kept pressing. With each passing day, more and more bioships arrived at Octaria to begin the consumption process, their insatiable hunger consuming captured areas and spawning fresh waves of Tyranid reinforcements. In the midst of this relentless onslaught, the Swarm Lord played a waiting game. It patiently observed the battlefield from afar, watching as the Overfiend found himself increasingly isolated and separated from his lieutenants. When the time was ripe, the Swarm Lord summoned 2 megaswarms to envelop the Overfiend's army and launch a massive attack. In the ensuing battle, The Tyranids pressed forward with such overwhelming numbers that even high-ranking Tyranid organisms were used as cannon fodder. Ork gargants became bogged down, surrounded by an ocean of Tyranid bodies, and the Overfiend found himself fighting alone in the epicenter of the carnage. As the Overfiend expended his energy in a frenzy of strikes, the Swarm Lord parried and maneuvered, exploiting its multiple limbs. Eventually, the Swarm Lord severed one of the power cables to the Overfiend's power claw, reducing the once fearsome weapon to a dead weight. The alien beast then launched into a furious assault, smashing open the Overfiend's head with 2 bone blades before sinking its maw into the Greenskins' skull, consuming his brain and ending the reign of the Overfiend. In the wake of the Overfiend's death, Octaria remains a war zone, with Greenskins spreading out and infighting increasing. 6 warlords have declared themselves the new Overfiend, each amassing forces in an attempt to seize control. Through all of this chaos, the Great Devourer persists, and it is clear that the Tyranids have seized the upper hand in the grim war of the Octarius system. The conflict, while turning in the favor of the Tyranids, is far from over. Within the shadowy confines of an ancient imperial cathedral on this forsaken world, a duel of epic proportions was about to unfold. Ghazghkull, demonstrating a cunning that belied his brutish exterior, detonated explosives at the entrance, effectively trapping himself and Ragnar in a secluded arena of death. In the ensuing battle, rage-fueled strikes were traded with equal ferocity. Yet, the Wolf Lord found an opening, severing the hydraulic cabling of Ghazghkull's monstrous armor, hindering the warboss's movements. This disadvantage did little to stop Ghazghkull, who retaliated with a crushing grip of his claw, leaving Ragnar gravely wounded. Despite the overwhelming pain, Ragnar drew upon every ounce of his strength, managing to behead Ghazghkull with a swift strike of his frost blade. A triumphant howl echoed through the cathedral as he held the severed head of his foe aloft. In this moment, Ghazghkull, teetering between life and death, expressed a remorseful lament about the uncertain fate of Makari and his unfinished mission. For 10 long days and nights, the once mighty Ghazghkull lay lifeless. Meanwhile, the heroic efforts of Ragnar's great company ensured his survival. His body, battered and broken, underwent days of intensive surgery and, in a miraculous transformation, he was reborn as a Primary Space Marine. When Ragnar returned to Krongr, it was to confirm the demise of his long-standing foe. What he found, however, was a sight that struck him with unspeakable horror. Ghazghkull, the beast he had slain, still lived. His lifeless body was recovered by Makari, bullets, and Grotsnik. The grandeur of the Waaagh began to wane. Their leader fallen, the Ork horde started to disintegrate. However, Grotsnik, the Mad Doc, had a plan. With a terrifying blend of lunacy and genius, he took the body of Ghazghkull and set about disassembling it before grafting the various parts onto a massive suit of armor. In a gambit that bordered on the reckless, Grotsnik harnessed the power of an orbiting generator, one that hovered precariously between the physical realm of the Materium and the chaos of the Immaterium. A bolt of emerald lightning surged from the generator, impacting precisely where Ghazghkull's body lay. The stakes were astronomical, with an 80% chance of triggering a catastrophe that could wipe out half the planet. Yet, against all odds, Grotsnik's mad plan worked. For 10 days and nights, the heavens crackled with raw energy, and on the 11th day, Ghazghkull rose once more. He emerged stronger, larger, more formidable than ever before. His resurgence marked by an aura of power so potent that it beckoned Greenskins from light years away, drawing them towards their revived warboss like moths to a flame. His very existence once again became a beacon of destruction, an announcement to the universe that Ghazghkull, Prophet of the Waaagh, was back and stronger than ever. The vast expanse of the galaxy is trembling, quaking under the terrifying might of the Great Waaagh. From the bustling heart of the Imperium to its farthest reaches, a wave of manic energy emanates, a wild surge rippling across the celestial canvas and resonating within the soul of every warp-sensitive being. It whispers in the Immaterium, its echoes spiraling through the ethereal currents and sending a shiver down the spines of those who comprehend its profound implications. Like an otherworldly lighthouse, this tumultuous wave acts as a psychic beacon, its irresistible call reaching out to the far-flung corners of the galaxy. Orks from every known sector feel its pull, a primal urge that guides them, drawing them to rally beneath the imposing banner of Ghazghkull. Amidst the palpable tension, conflicting reports begin to filter through the complex web of Imperial information channels. The Logis Strategos, the analytical minds responsible for deciphering and presenting strategic data, find themselves grappling with a bewildering enigma. The whereabouts of the Grand Warlord Ghazghkull are shrouded in uncertainty, causing a ripple of consternation within the highest echelons of the Imperium. The Warlord's formidable presence is simultaneously documented in a multitude of locations across the galaxy, leading to a sense of disquiet. From the teeming war zones of Octarius to the sacked regions of Cantissa, from the blood-soaked fields of Orokthar to the grim darkness of the Imperium Nihilus, and amidst the fiery battles around Riza, Ghazghkull appears to be omnipresent. The mystery deepens, with theories surfacing that the Orks are exploiting the volatile warp storms as a means of navigation across the star-strewn reaches of the galaxy. Adding to the enigma, extreme empiric time dilation emerges as a potential explanation for the simultaneous sightings. The scattered puzzle pieces create a picture of chaotic movement and invincibility, a testament to the formidable prowess and unpredictability of Ghazghkull and his Great Waaagh. In the upcoming segments of this series, we will acquaint ourselves with other notorious Ork Waaghs. To ensure you don't miss the release of these new episodes, subscribe to our channel and hit the bell icon. Stay tuned, and let's continue unraveling the intricacies of the Orkoid species together.